A woman from the UK moved to Japan in order to earn enough money to pay off her debts. In order to do that, she starts working as a hostess in one of the nightclubs. There, she's advised to make the customers want to return. Once one of them does, he offers her a ride to a secondary location where she will disappear from. This is the story of Lucie Blackman. I don't know who needs to hear this, but if you're a tomboy yourself, just go into male section of any store. They just have better options. Like, look at this hoodie. I just got it in like size M, which would be my size in the female section, but I just got it from the male section. The Space Jam shirt is also male. Quite literally everything I have bought recently is from a male section, and I have absolutely no regrets. Fashion sense not found. This bitch, the girl in the back, which if you are new here, so sorry about her. It's famously a character that I have given to personify my inner thoughts. How has your girl in the back been recently? Because mine has been doing everything, trying to sabotage the shit out of me. What is this in the room? Okay, so yeah, the girl in the back has been working against me. I have to tell you, she's usually here to give like comedic effects, but recently she's been a real bitch, and that is mostly because this case really affects me. It's kind of complex. If you miss out on certain details, the story doesn't make sense. So I want to tell it well, and then of course the girl in the back of my head, as it would, is trying to sabotage the shit out of me. Like, you know, you can't tell it, what about the videos in the back? What should they be? You can't even decide on the... Like, bitch, give me a break. Also, yes, I might not be great on fashion sense. I might not be strong in that area. That has never been up for debate. I never said I was, even though you just gave advice to the people, Maja. But I know a thing or two about true crime. And this story is so undercovered and just not really spoken about for the story that it is. It's one of the most interesting things I have read about. It's one of the most interesting things I have researched. I have to give a shout out to this book. Also, like, this isn't the book that you read on like the top charts, which it definitely should be. You need to read this book. It's like, definitely, I mean, Malala is still like kind of like #1 for me, the book I Am Malala. This one probably goes straight under it. So far, it's on #2 on my true crime book list. I leave the playlist on the books that I have spoken about on this channel in the description box if you want to listen to that one after. I usually only give this kind of shout out to the books that are really worth it, like the books that you gotta read. So this one definitely a must read. And rule, move away, because this guy is the type of book that you read and then you look up who the person is and you kind of like research all of them. You're like, I want another book that they have written. That's the type of book we're talking about. The case has so many twists, so many plot lines. Each character has their own story and their own mindset, and you're kind of like, do I like this person? Do I not? Should I get attached? Should I not? Each character makes you think, and it's just the story as a whole will completely change your perception about true crime, or at least it has done that for me, and well, not many stories have done that for me. So this one was definitely a shocker, and for me personally, I got so attached to this case. I knew I had to tell this story ever since I heard it on Rotten Mango by the Queen Stephanie Sue, because of the immigrant aspect of it. Because I know myself, I could have probably been in this situation, and because the family of the victim has come out of it, building her trust and giving other families information on what to do if their daughter, their loved one, was to ever be in a similar situation. So I think there's a lot to learn in this case, but it's also really useful information. That's why I hate that this story is just not told on so many podcasts and channels. So we're here to change that. Just before diving in, slap your phone on your freaking PJs a couple of times. Disclaimer time. This story will be a two-parter, probably should have mentioned that before the disclaimer, and also throughout both parts the theme of rape is prevalent. We are talking about a serial rapist here. I will, as always, put a timestamp on the screen, mostly here in the second part, anytime something of a graphic description is going to pop up in a story, but I just don't want you to like dive in and then, you know, hate me and punch your own screen and hurt your knuckles when you dive into a story not knowing what the prevalent theme of the case is. And as always, if you are a child, back the hell out. Maja versus children, yet again, it's not a topic that you should be able to watch. Unless you're like, you know, I think YouTube counts children up to 18. Yet again, Maja versus children. Maja 1, children 0, because according to the settings I have set up for this video, YouTube shouldn't really be recommending me to children anyways, because I want to say there are lighter topics on my channel, and I will probably put a lighter one in the description, but I famously go for sexual true crime cases. What is wrong with me? Most of what came after this sentence is in the outtakes part, so listen to the whole case and then to that I just went on. And now let us actually dive into the story. Where I'm going to start this story off and then backtrack from there is in Japan. Lucie and her friend Louise are already in Japan. They have been hostessing for the past few months, and that night they had the same plan as always. They were to go to the club that they work, the Casablanca, for around 8 p.m. where they would change from their day clothes, start hostessing up until about 2, 3 in the morning, and then they would probably go out clubbing up until like 7 a.m., sleep until late afternoon, and then just repeat the same action. This afternoon seemed a bit different. Louise separated from Lucie and she went into town to shop. And she was kind of using trains, being like really confused with finding this location and just getting lost in the massiveness of the city. While Lucie stayed at this hostel-like place where the two of them were living, and she was waiting for a phone call from one of her customers, the person that she met at one of the clubs. This customer called that landline phone at this guest house hostel at around 3:20, and he told Lucie he is still coming, he's just a bit late. So Lucie's sort of doing the math in her head, like, okay, I'm gonna have a late lunch with this customer and then still be in the club in time for my hostessing duties for 8 p.m. No problem, like, it can still fit into the timeline. Next thing Louise remembers as she's shopping is getting a phone call from Lucie. It just seems like Lucie is in a car, like she can sort of hear the noises as if she's on the road, and Lucie tells her like, yeah, listen, I'm late, he's driving me to this seaside place. She doesn't say his name. He's driving me to this seaside place, we're just gonna have late lunch, but everything is still according to the plan, I will still make it to the club for 8 p.m. And she just says, I'm using his phone, so I can't stay on this line for long. And then she hangs up, hands the phone back to this customer who was in the car with her. After Lucie hung up, Louise immediately got a really weird feeling. Like, this just wasn't typical Lucie. She just wouldn't go into a car with a customer that she might not know so well onto the seaside without like actually checking in, telling every single detail to Louise. The two of them were actually best friends since they were 13 years old, so this just immediately struck her as off. But she sees no further reason to panic at this time. After around 7 p.m., Lucie rings Louise again, and she rings her from what seems to be yet another different phone number. She tells Louise that this is actually her phone, like this customer has bought this phone to Lucie, and she's just calling her from this phone to again check in, say she might be a bit late, but still 8ish, she should be back in town, she's just having like a dinner with this customer now, and he actually got like this brand new bottle of champagne that they're sipping on. After this phone call, again, Louise is weirded out, but no reason to panic. Lucie, after this phone call at around 7:20, makes a phone call to her boyfriend Scott. This is an American guy that she met in Japan and started dating in the previous couple of months. And Scott doesn't answer the phone, so she just leaves him a voicemail. In this voicemail, Lucie will promise to meet with Scott tomorrow. But this meeting will never happen because that evening Lucie Blackman would disappear. In town, Louise has finished her shopping and has went to the club, expecting Lucie to appear at around 8 p.m. But then she doesn't. An hour passes and Louise is freaking out. She's speaking to the management, she's speaking to the girls in the bar, other hostesses, saying this just isn't like Lucie. She would have told me if she wasn't to appear. Lucie was really dependable. So Louise, like every good friend would, does all of the legwork. She calls all of the hospitals, she calls all of the friends, she prints out Lucie's picture and then goes all across Roppongi where these hostess clubs were, at Roppongi Crossing, speaking to all of the other girls, goes to the clubs where they went to like speak about getting the job, quite literally does everything, and she knows that the panic should really be set from this point on because Lucie wouldn't just disappear on her when she has made plans to meet up and just continue her life as normal that evening. What Louise didn't do from the get-go, and there was an obvious reason for this, is go straight to the police. And she knew, well, A, they're gonna not take it seriously because hostessing, kind of falls under the umbrella of sex work, at least in the eyes of the public and the police. And also, both of them, Louise and Lucie, were there on tourist visas. So these were the 3 months visas, but you shouldn't be working. That was kind of like one of the rules. So they were technically doing something illegally. So if she was to go to the police, maybe Lucie will get into even more trouble, even if she decided to just go on her own. But later, the next day, she just decides to go straight to the police and report it, and she goes about it a bit differently. She just mentions that Lucie is a tourist from the UK and that she met this Japanese guy. She doesn't know any further details, and she went on a date with him and then has disappeared. So no mention of hostessing and that this guy was an actual customer. The police kind of notes down the report but doesn't really take it seriously. So Louise goes to the British Embassy. Listen, Louise is the friend that you need in this situation. In the British Embassy, she speaks to the consular. And this guy kind of appears to take it more seriously. He speaks to Louise about Lucie's personality, like is she the kind of person that would do something like this, go off on a friend. Again, Lucie reiterates the same story. And he says, I mean, out of everything you have told me, this kind of seems like a possible abduction. At this point, it has been about 2 days. Nobody's really making any movements, which we know it's crucial within the first 48 hours if we are actually suspecting abduction. And Louise isn't sleeping at night. She just doesn't know what to do next. Like, nobody is taking her seriously for the past few days. She knows that something is wrong, but is here on a tourist visa. She just thought like she's gonna come here, do hostessing for 3 months and go back home, and that's about it. She never expected this to happen and doesn't really know what course of action to follow. Lucie disappeared on a Saturday, and 2 days later, on a Monday, Louise will get an interesting call. So a phone rang after 5 p.m. and Louise answers. The caller asks, is she Louise Phillips? She says yes. And then this man says that he wants to talk about Lucie Blackman. So Louise is like, oh my god, like where is she? Who are you? How do you know her? This guy introduces himself as Akira Takagi, and he tells Louise he was the person in the car. Yes, that evening they went on that date. And then after that date, Lucie was about to take the train back to the town, but she actually decided that she is going to meet Akira's guru. Lucie, you see, has decided that she is going to join a cult. This cult falls under a newly risen religion, and it's called Chiba. And Louise is there like scribbling everything down, like, can you spell Chiba for me? What cult? Like, why did she join a cult? And she's always trying to push for like, can I speak with my friend? Can I speak with Lucie? I need a proof of life here. But this Akira person always manages to kind of deflect any further questions. He says she isn't feeling very well right now. Lucie just wanted him to reiterate on her behalf to both Louise and the boyfriend Scotto, which is like the equivalent of Scott, that she isn't coming back, that she doesn't want to be contacted. And he says a couple of things that make Louise think, okay, this man has actually spoken with my friend. He says that he is aware that Lucie has had debts, that she is about £6,000 or £7,000 in debt, but she is paying those debts off now in a better way. And then a couple of times he tries to kind of deflect and move the conversation in the opposite direction. And this Akira person is always like, anyways, where do you live? What is your address? And Louise is just like thinking speedily on the go, like, what do I say? I'm not gonna give him my address. So smartly she says, ask Lucie. Lucie lives with me. She can give you the address. And this guy's like, well, Lucie can't really talk right now. She's like, well, I actually can't remember. She just like pushes that away, trying to again get more information on Lucie. Like, why can't Lucie give you our address? But in the back of her head, she's thinking, if I give him any sort of address, he's gonna come for me. He says he's asking for address in order to like send some of the belongings back. Yet again, all of the red flags are popping into Louise's head, like, why is he sending all of the belongings back? Like, even if it was a cult, why isn't she either using any of the belongings, or why aren't they holding them on their own location if Lucie is still alive? Louise, now thinking all of these thoughts, asks, well, can I join the cult? Like, I came to Japan with my friend. So, like, can you tell me more about this cult? And, like, does this guru want other people to join? And this guy says, like, I'm going to have to speak to the guru. And this is where this phone call ends. Now, with this information, Louise goes back to the British embassy. Lucie's parents get called in and they fly into Japan. It will take a week for the news on Lucie's disappearance to reach the whole world. So let's backtrack here and speak about Lucie and who she was, because it is really prevalent to understand the rest of this story. Lucie was born on the 1st of September 1978, and she was named after the Latin word for light. And this is because her mom Jane's story in itself of her childhood is quite interesting, and she has gone through quite a lot of suffering, so she saw her own daughter as sort of like the light at the end of the tunnel. She always saw like a really deep connection between herself and Lucie. Jane, Lucie's mom, suppressed quite a lot of things from her own childhood. She remembers her own mom dying at the age of 40 when Jane was only 12 years old. And from then on, she kind of left school when she was 15. And then she had a friend, quite like Lucie had Louise, that at the age of 19 kind of inspired her to go travel, do something fun for work abroad. So instead of Japan here, they went to Mallorca in Spain, and they were just doing like some cleaning for money for a couple of years. Once Jane was back from Spain, this friend of hers really wanted to introduce her to this guy, another friend that she had. And she kind of said like, okay, this guy kind of has a girlfriend, but I don't think it's serious. Like, he just returned from south of France, kind of like similar story. He went because he was young, you know, to like experience. Like, I don't think this is serious. I really think the two of you would click. So she introduces Tim to Jane, and 17 months later, the two of them end up getting married. At the time the two of them got married, Tim was working for a shoe shop, so none of them really had some amazing savings on the side. They were really living day by day. But just before Lucie got born, Tim moved to work in property development, and they started kind of amassing wealth, so they were quite well off. They were at the working class level, progressing upwards when Lucie was born in 78. Despite of everything that will happen later in this story, Jane at this point had to acknowledge that when Lucie was a toddler, Tim actually was the person that saved her life at some point. Lucie had ongoing health issues ever since she was born. Even as a toddler, she had something called febrile convulsions, probably mispronouncing that, which are these spasms that are caused by fever or dehydration, causing a child to swallow their own tongue, which of course prevents them from breathing. So when Lucy was only 20 something months old, she was less than 2 years old, Tim just entered the room and found her motionless on the bed. So what he did, as Jane was calling the ambulance, he kind of like had to stick his fingers inside of Lucy's small mouth to like pull her tongue out and then try to give her CPR. And luckily he knew what he was doing, because the first responders on the scene said had he not done that, we wouldn't have made it here in time to save your daughter. The health issues didn't stop there though. When Lucy was 12 years old, she got pneumonia. And around this time, the financial issues kind of began in the family. Tim's property development business kind of went into debt, and then, well, he had to close off that company in order not to go into administration and things. But Lucy was excelling in all other areas. Like, she was sick often, and this meant that she had to take days off from school and stay at home. But regardless, she was still excelling. She got a scholarship to go to Walthamstow Hall, which is kind of a posh school here in London. And she was just really meticulous and excelling at everything else. Lucy was always the child who was like super organized, sort of like even OCD at times. But beyond that, what really made Lucy connect to her mother Jane was the love and the connection to the supernatural. This isn't super prevalent for the plot, but I just found it interesting because the way that Jane realized this supernatural bond that she has with her daughter, was when she was nursing her back to health because of pneumonia. Like, Lucy was kind of bedbound a lot. She started smelling smells of cigars, like sort of like not cigarettes but really cigars coming off of Lucy's room. And she was like, you know, you're like 12, you aren't smoking freaking cigars, also you're bedbound, it's not like you're going outside to get some expensive ass cigars. So she asked Lucy about the smell, and Lucy would say, oh no, the man that sits at the end of my bed smokes these cigars at night. And the mom was just like, what man? Like, she's tripping, you know, she has lost her mind, we have lost Lucy here. But later, when she was going through the family albums, Lucy pointed to her great-grandfather and she said, no, that's the man that is sitting next to me on my bed. And she kind of couldn't deny it because the smell was there. So there was always this kind of bond between the two of them, as if like a little inside secret that the two of them were honed in on, that the rest of the family just didn't understand. Lucy eventually recovered from this pneumonia and just all of the health issues that she had, and just as Jane thought she can relax, you know, she won't be losing her daughter to the disease, sort of this curse, whatever you want to consider it as, from her side of the family is over, her sister, Jane's sister, fell ill. And they kind of didn't really notice in time, this was now the 90s, that the slowness of movement, fumbling of words actually meant that Kate had a tumor on her brain. So they realized this way too late, and Jane lost her sister, Kate. After this, Jane's father started having like clogged blood vessels, and they started from like the foot, then the calf, and then like just took over all of his right leg, so he had to have the leg amputated. And during this time, Tim was always by Jane's side. By this point, they were married for 19 years. They had Lucy, and after Lucy, they had two other children. Lucy had a sister called Sophie and a brother called Rupert. So one night, just reflecting on everything, they're sitting at a dinner table, and Tim says, I love being family. And Jane will remember these words in the back of her head forever, because the next day a man rang Jane and he said that he believes Tim, Jane's husband, is sleeping with his wife. So Jane confronts Tim, and Tim never denies the affair, and that is when the two of them got divorced, and the marriage of 19 years has just ended. Just like every story of divorce that ended on bad terms, where one party cheated, the kids kind of started taking sides. And Lucy was always a peacemaker in these situations. When like Sophie and Rupert started arguing with Jane, she was always there to calm the situation down. Not only was she a peacemaker, but after the divorce, Jane became really liberal. She allowed all of the children to do whatever they wanted. If they wanted to bring a girlfriend or a boyfriend to the house, that was all allowed. So Lucy kind of had to set up the boundaries and really became the mother to Jane rather than the other way around. Something that really owns this story, and in particular from this point on, is who Lucy was as a person and how she lived her life. So at this point, she finished her GCSEs, she has done her A levels, but had no plans to apply for university, at least not as of yet. So, through a family friend, she gets a job at the French investment bank, Société Générale, however you pronounce that. And here you kind of have to fit the part, just like I will explain later with hostessing. But this truly becomes how Lucy lived her life. She always was girly from the young age compared to like her sister Sophie, who was a tomboy. So she always spent a lot of money and care making sure that she looks meticulous, that her hair is always like straightened, is always washed, always looks fresh, that her nails always have the manicure done, that she has like the latest makeup and that she's on top of all of the fashion trends. She really liked to look nice and well spared no expense making sure that she does. And obviously working with clients at an investment bank, working with foreign people, well, you kind of had to present yourself that way. So at this point, she's 18, 19, already kind of looking the part and understanding what needs to be done in order to retain a customer. And beyond work, really, when I'm talking about Lucy and how she saw everything as an experience, she really lived the part in any sort of job that she did. What I mean by that is, the weekends she would spend her time shopping in order to make herself look good. She didn't do it just for job, like as I mentioned, this was sort of like part of who she was. Next, she used her salary to get herself a car. This wasn't like any particular car, it was just like a black Renault. But she has done this because, of course, this was still the 90s. So, there were no like smartphones, you listening to like the podcast and catching up on like the stocks app. So she has done this so that on the way to work, she can kind of play the radio, familiarize herself with the financial market of the day, with where the stock levels are. Again, to fit the part. Lucy really immersed herself in everything she did in life. And whether it was because of her illness through her teenage years or whether it was because she had to mature so quickly, she was really all about the method and technique, all about discipline. For example, this was her New Year's resolution list because she was a lover of lists. Listen, Lucy and me would have made the best of friends. So her New Year's resolutions: go to the gym 3 to 4 times per week, try to do 2 other activities as well. Stop using both phones. From March, start putting money away. Sleep more. Learn Italian. Save all of commissions. Scrub and tan every day. Lotion on days in between. Drink more water. In another diary entry, she had another list, and this one was called The Rules, and it referred to the men, to potential suitors. So this list would say, keep cool, let him do all the work, the calling, everything. Keep your cards close to your chest. If he wants to know how you feel, he'll ask. Keep chat light. You're not falling for him. Because of how Lucy lived her life, because she was the either 100% or nothing kind of girl, well, when she was at Société Générale, God, I can't never pronounce a French word ever again. When she was at the French investment bank, she really started falling into debts because of how she was living her life. So even though she was getting paid okay, she started falling into debts because of all of the expenses, because of all of the shopping habits, because she always had to look on point, and because she would always kind of go for drinks after work as well. And because she was still at the entry-level job, she just wasn't earning enough money to match all of those expenses. At this point, her friend Louise was working as the air hostess for British Airways, so she suggests Lucie applies for that same job. She says, it's not really hard work, like if you prove yourself, you might be doing the long haul flights, so like traveling to other countries, then you can sightsee. Just give it a try, see if you like it more. So Lucie does. She applies to work for British Airways, she gets the job, she starts working, but soon enough she just realizes it's not for her. She's only doing like short haul flights, so within the UK, she isn't really seeing any places overseas, and on the rare occasion that she does, she finds it exhausting. She almost feels as she felt when she was in her young teenage years. When she would return from these long-haul flights, she would sleep for 15 hours a day. She just would note in her diary how she didn't feel this was for her, and that she constantly just felt exhausted, and as if she had to be bedridden if she was to continue doing this job. And yet again, it wasn't paying off. She wasn't making enough money doing this job to start paying off all of her debts. At this point, Lucie met Marco. Now, Lucie had other boyfriends when she was working at the investment bank, but none of them really made her fall for them as much as Marco did. He had a history of being a model, and now that she was working for BA, Lucie had about 10 days off a month, and most of them she was spending with her new Italian boyfriend. Marco would usually come pick her up from the airport in her car, and then they would either go clubbing or spend time at each other's houses. But Marco really seemed prone to sickness. So here again, Lucie takes the role of the mother, takes Jane's role, who Jane was when Lucie would get sick as a child, and she's kind of nursing him always back to health. Then one day Marco is supposed to pick her up from the airport, but he doesn't show up. And Lucie, of course, understandably is in quite a state, like he isn't answering her phone calls. So she calls one of his cousins, or like a family member, and this family member tells Lucie this is just something that Marco does. He is no model. He's actually a coke addict that kind of does this, where he starts dating somebody, then starts using their car, kind of really depending on them to take care of him while he's really nurturing a coke habit. So of course here, Lucie is pissed. She sends her sister Sophie to go to Marco's house just to pick the keys of her own car. So Sophie goes to Marco's apartment, she just walks in to take the key, punches him in the face and gets the hell out. And that is how that relationship ended. Marco either overdosed or intentionally committed suicide only a couple of months after that. And in terms of where Lucie is now, she obviously took this to the heart, and she is overwhelmed with her increasing debt, with her unhappiness at BA. So to get her mind off things, she keeps going clubbing. On one such night out with Sam, Lucie met with Sam's old friend called Jamie, and both of them just immediately clicked and fell really hard for one another. Jamie lived in Islington here in North London, and Lucie lived with her family still in Sevenoaks. The two of them introduced one another with their parents. Jane was already considering Jamie like his son-in-law, and Jamie really fell hard, and he said that was prevalently because Lucie was just so nice and likable. From the diary entries that were available in this book, Lucie has fallen for Jamie. But I wouldn't necessarily say one or the other has fallen more, even though the whole story kind of makes you believe that he was the one who had more feelings here. I just think she was completely preoccupied with this idea of just paying off her debt. Because there's a whole summary of what she was spending her monthly salary from the BA on. So she earned about 1,600 a month from her job as the stewardess. And she would be budgeting throughout her diary what part of her salary went on what expense. And by the end of each month, she would realize that she is spending more money than she's making. And she even took a loan out from a bank, and then obviously the interest there is piling up because now you have to sort of like pay off more than you have basically borrowed from the bank in the first place. So here, Louise, her friend, jumps in again, and she just mentions in passing how her sister, actually, Louise's sister, used to work in Japan. It would be this job that they called hostessing, and the way Louise described it is that the only difference between what Lucie and her were doing now for British Airways and that job in Japan was the altitude. One was happening in the air, while the other one was happening in the clubs on the ground. The idea was go on a tourist visa. The tourist visa would only allow them to stay there for 3 months anyways. Then they will just work regardless of it being illegal and something you shouldn't do on a tourist visa. By the end of those 3 months, Lucie would be able to return to the UK with her debts being paid and just start off from point zero, do any job that she likes. Neither of the two really explained to their families what this job entails until they actually reached Japan. So they kind of said it's sort of like waitressing, da 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 da, but Lucie started introducing this idea to Jane and to her family, like this is something I'm really considering of doing. And Jane was immediately skeptical, like never before. All of the fears about losing a loved one, the fact that Jane lost her sister and her mother and now possibly might lose her daughter, just resurfaced. And she was doing everything in her power to convince Lucie that this trip is a bad idea. She would be leaving these articles about how bad state of economy is in Japan in Lucie's room, sort of being like, well, how do you expect to earn a lot of money when this is how the economic state is in the country? How do you expect to do it on a tourist visa? Who is going to pay for this flight to begin with when you're already in debt? This is just a bad plan. But the partial solution to that came from Louise. So as I mentioned, Louise and Lucie knew each other from when they were 13. Louise was always a bubblier one. She was just more of an extrovert, and that will become yet again prevalent in this story. But it also made Lucie's parents not fully trust her. Not that they didn't trust her because they would have probably told Lucie to stop being friends with her. It was just that, Louise was a crazy one. She was the one that got her to start working for British Airways. She's always the one with the crazy ideas. She was a chatterbox. She would just blabber, and the two of them would just laugh about the silliest things that nobody else found funny, and they just didn't fully understand Louise. But Louise was so convinced that this would work, and in fact she said her sister did the same job in Japan, that she actually offered to pay for half of the plane ticket. So, Lucie again offered up a solution to her mom, this is happening. This trip is being booked. I'm getting the tourist visa and I'm heading to Japan. And even though Lucie appeared confident about this trip on the surface, she would put a brave face on, her diary entries would say the complete opposite. Her gut feeling, just like Jane's, was telling her that this is all wrong. She was unsure of stepping on that plane, she was unsure of all of these plans, what she's going to encounter there. But then you have to remember that she always had that goal of clearing her debt in her mind. The few months before she headed for Japan, everybody really remembered Lucie was completely out of her element. She was making erratic, rash decisions. For starters, she broke off with Jamie. Jamie was just shook, yeah, sure, you can go to Japan, but you're telling me you're staying there for only 3 months. Why wouldn't you stay in this relationship? Because you plan to return. He didn't know that she actually, just after breaking up with him a couple of weeks later, started dating somebody else. It just wasn't Lucie. She was cutting off ties with everybody, as if she was to never see them again, which now in hindsight is really eerie. I mean, it was eerie just thinking that, yeah, she will definitely return, but once you learn what actually happens to her, it just adds to how morbid these goodbyes really were. She was going out of her way to meet with her friends, like even with some friends that she hasn't met up in years. She was writing goodbye letters to her best friends like Sam. She also even went out of her way to meet up and rekindle a relationship with her dad, Tim. As I mentioned, the kids had their preferences in terms of like which parents they're leaning more towards. And at that point, it was kind of only Sophie that sort of was civil with her dad. So Lucy mostly took Jane's side. So this was out of character, especially because Tim by this point has already moved on. And he moved on with this woman who had her children. So basically, he was just living with another family, not really, paying the alimony, taking care of his own biological children. One of her last decisions that she made from the UK was to rekindle her relationship with her dad. And the last couple of days that she spent over here before heading to Japan were kind of murky. Like, her dad thought that she was with her sister and the siblings. Her mom thought that she was having dinner with her dad. Her friends thought that she was with her boyfriend. Nobody really knew what was going on through Lucy's head. It's just that everybody had the same unsettling feeling about this trip. So, on the stairs, just as she's boarding her flight to Japan, she gives one last call to her now ex-boyfriend Jamie. And Jamie said about this call, it's just like you could hear it in Lucy's voice. This wasn't right. He was just thinking in his head, like, just get off those steps. Just go back into the airport, go back home, everything is gonna be okay. Just don't go onto this flight. But it was far beyond that point. Lucy would never disappoint Louise, she in the end paid for half of that ticket, and she was determined to go there for one single goal, to come back 3 months from then and turn a new leaf in her life, start from a completely new page. What no one knew is that from that moment on, Lucy only had 59 days to live. Once they would land in Japan, Louise and Lucy headed for this hostel. Well, they would call it a shit house because technically that is what it was. It was kind of like a guest house hostel vibe where they shared a room with 6 other women, and there was like futon mattresses that were just kind of looking really rough, cracked mirrors, the toilets which looked more like squatters. It was just like really disgusting. This wasn't your abroad in Japan YouTube channel with like Chris going to, is his name Chris? You are a regular, you actually a subscriber to this channel, you should know. With, Chris going to like the most expensive flat in Japan and stuff. No, this was in Roppongi. It was the area that stereotypically had 3 kinds of people living in it. First kinds of tourists in this area were African men who owned the bars. Second were the Roppongi girls, the local girls who were after the foreign men. And the third type of tourists were the ones Louise and Lucy fit into. Those were the Caucasian women working as dancers, as hostesses, working at the Roppongi clubs. The 2 friends didn't really tell their families where they're gonna be staying. Lucy actually had an aunt that lived in Japan, so, well, she lied to her family and Lucy lied to hers that they're gonna stay with her as they're just working and waitressing. But instead, the person that they met at the shit house was Krista. This was Louise's sister's friend from the days when Louise's sister was living in Japan. As they make it there, Krista, of course, like understands like it's not a glamorous place. She, helps them make it their own as much as that's possible. Sort of like decorate it with different posters, different drapes. And she tells them, listen, you just get enough sleep because obviously jet lag, just get enough sleep. Tomorrow you can go to any of these clubs. She kind of like gives them a list. Just go into the clubs, see if they have any vacancies. Those are the good places to work at, and you can start working tomorrow already in the next couple of days and start immediately accumulating money. One of those clubs that the girls would go to the next day looking for work was Club Casablanca. From the outside, without knowing what you're looking for, you would have really missed this place. It was in a really unassuming building, and it was also on the 6th floor. Here, an elevator would open facing a dimly lit room, maybe 20 feet by 60. To the left there was a bar, and to the right there was this electric keyboard on a raised stand, and there was a screen and speakers for the karaoke. Around the walls you could see couches and armchairs in pale blue color and 12 low tables. And this is the bar where Luis and Lucie will get hired. With the girls finally getting the job at Casablanca, the time has finally come to speak about hostessing, to speak about what this job entailed. I feel there are two main misconceptions when it comes to hostessing and how we perceive it. One is that either we go way back, like between the First and the Second World War, and we think about geishas, or the other one is that we westernize it and we think about strippers. And hostessing really entailed none of the two. After the Second World War, this craze for the international exotic cultures started up in Japan. First, certain international restaurants would open up, with Italian restaurants opening in 1959, with Italian restaurants opening in Roppongi in 1956. By 1964, the year Tokyo Olympics took place, there were many hostess bars that have opened, but the women that worked in them at that time were Japanese. That all changed in 1969 when Bar Casanova opened up in Roppongi district, and this bar mainly employed international hostesses. So if you recall, at the beginning of this story, I said that Lucie was expected to return to Casablanca for 8 p.m. Different hostesses, including Lucie and Louise, would appear at the club around 8 o'clock. They would change from jeans and shirt, whatever they were wearing that day, into like a dress, sort of minimal jewelry, really whatever the customers would want to see. And around 9 p.m., the doors would open and the customers would start coming in. The locals, local Japanese men, knew exactly what hostessing would entail. They would be seated at a table with one of the girls. The manager would sometimes sort of like allocate the girls to the table. They would just start chatting up. And when it comes to the managers, the first hour didn't really matter to them. That was kind of like a flat rate for the first hour. The goal for these hostesses was to keep them staying for longer and longer and to get these customers to return. The training for the hostesses would consist of mainly teaching them how to be as submissive as possible, just never interrupt the customer, how to light up their cigarette, how to pour their drinks, and how to get them to buy further drinks, how to upsell. As a hostess, you were supposed to get them talking, get them chatting about their life, about any of their interests. And a lot of times these chats would turn dirty. They would start talking about sexual things, like other sexual experiences they have had, flirting with one another. But with locals in particular, that was where it would end. The customers would be walking into these clubs never expecting a hostess to actually go home with them. If they wanted that to happen, they could go to another gentleman's club down the corner. This district consisted of plenty of different bars, like the pantsless karaoke bars, gentleman clubs, strippers bars, massage parlors. There were plenty of other choices for any of their needs. Hostesses and this relationship between the customers and them were kind of romanticized. What the Queen Stephanie Sue said, by the end of the night, you are supposed to feel as a customer as if the fate just won't allow for the two of you to end up together. That's what you're supposed to leave feeling, and that in turn would make you come back. Once you were to get these men to return and to request to chat with you and spend time with you by name, this is where you start getting money. Depending on the club, a hostess would get paid a flat rate per hour. Usually it would be around $20. So, it can be 30, it can be probably 15 or maybe even 10, depending on if you're a new girl, how experienced you are, how many customers you bring. And on the other end, a customer would pay around $200 per hour. So a customer comes in, they are placed with a girl, and they have unlimited amount of just whiskey and beer. But then you as a hostess, kind of like pouring that whiskey, say, I actually heard there is a specialty. There's a specialty champagne. You can't find this anywhere else, and I have had it the other night. Like, let's start pouring that champagne. Strategically, you get this customer to buy that alcohol once sort of half an hour, 45 minutes have passed, because when you get them to go into the next hour, even if it is just by the minute, even if it is just by 60 seconds, you get more money. You get paid more because you have gotten the customer to stay and spend more money, spend another $200. When they walk in to that door asking for you by your name, you get commission. But the most money that you get is by doing something that's called dohans. I'm probably mispronouncing that, but this is going on dates with customers. Because again, everything is about retention. And again, among the locals, with the Japanese men, this even going beyond the club doors isn't expected to turn sexual. If I were to make a comparison, if you are watching this from Western country, from the US, I would actually compare this mostly to what is known as the girlfriend experience. So you're technically paying for somebody to give you company, to make you company. Now, something important that the book doesn't mention, but the Queen Stephanie Sue does, that I actually find really quite pertinent to this story, was that the locals, the Japanese men, understood how hostessing works. They understood, yep, you can have all the sex talk at the table about like how long and big your penises are, but you're not bringing this girl home. When you go on this date outside the club, she's not sleeping with you. It was just like a common understanding. It was just cultural. But outsiders, mostly Westerners, wouldn't. Girls that have previously been into hostessing would say that the chats just would get mundane. The whole job would just be exhausting. Like by the end of the night, you're speaking about something you're really not interested in. You're just faking this customer service for about 5-6 hours. So it's not something you would do for long periods of time. You're quite literally just there to get that commission, to get that money. Because if you were to just calculate a flat rate, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, the night would sort of start at like 9 p.m. and usually end at 3 p.m. So 5-6 hours, 20 pounds, even if you were to do that, 5-6 nights a week, you would get around $2,500 monthly. So that wouldn't have paid off debts that Lucie has had. So you need to get customers to come back, and you also need to get involved into these dohans, into these dates outside of the club. And not just that, but if you don't accumulate enough dohans during the month, you will just outright get fired. And the way this book makes me picture it is quite like this, because this is where managers get introduced. In this story, the manager's name is Kai. So the way he would describe this, it's quite vibrant, it's quite circular. So as I mentioned, the tables would be kind of like around the room, right? So 9 o'clock, the elevator door opens. Customer walks in. He places them with a pretty looking girl. He is observing them, like the waiters and the managers, because obviously there's more waiters than, managers. The waiters are kind of like spies. They're observing the situation, they're reading the cues, they're reading the body language. If they notice a customer is sort of checking their watch, if they're noticing a customer is going towards the toilet, they immediately figure out a strategy. They flag it to the manager. The manager then asks the girl to wait by the toilet. They just pull them in. Or if they notice it's about 30 minutes in, 45 minutes in, the conversation is going smoothly, but they want this customer going into the second, into the third hour, the manager kind of just waves to the pretty girl and he pulls her over and he places her with a different customer because, as I mentioned, it's multiple tables, it's going on, like it just keeps moving table to table. These girls are kind of like just switched around. And then he places what they call in this book an ugly girl, so somebody who just isn't the customer's type, with him. And then of course this customer is going to be like, well, what the fuck, like I wanted to speak to that girl. So the manager would say, well, actually she's busy now, she's like, speaking with another customer, she'll be available in half an hour. Now would you want a champagne on the house, that like super pricey champagne? And that's just how it keeps moving, night by night. So you can see how this can get to you, I guess, how you need to have like a goal in mind. But just by doing math, like if you are doing well, depending how well really, but there are hostesses that are making about 15,000 a month. So if Lucy was to make even half of that, that would already pay her debts because she was around 7,000 pounds in debt. So even just working there for a month, kind of bringing enough customers in, that would have already paid her debts. So if she was to stay there, stick to it for 3 months, she would have already paid off her debts and have like some money in savings, finally start from scratch. Because of these managers, the girls would feel safe. As I mentioned, it was a mundane job, like, they would chat about same things, especially if it was with the same client. But the managers would ensure that nothing inappropriate was going on. And as I mentioned, with foreigners would come there with different expectations of what hostessing was. So the managers again would just like escort them. If the girl was to report that any of the customers was like abusive, expecting something, no, the manager would just kick them out. To wrap this talk about hostessing up, usually these managers would be looking for young girls, like legal but young. The perfect age would be between 20 and 22, and Lucy here was 21, as was Louise. The managers would also choose these girls carefully. Yes, foreign girls was an immediate plus, but they also didn't like the extremely extroverted types, like the extremely gregarious ones, because, as I mentioned during the training for hostessing, they would already tell you to be submissive, to just, not have elbows on the table, not sit like, you're at your own house, so to always act as if you're a smaller, submissive type, because that will keep them coming back. And after spending some time in Japan, you would kind of get accustomed. You might even be able to spot a massage girl and differentiate her from somebody like a hostess. And even though they're not involved in sex work, they usually do fall under its umbrella, under the umbrella of sex industry. And something that I find interesting that this book points out is that despite of these hostesses not indulging into sex work, they are still considered dirty. And it is because of how they're degraded that they're enjoyed. Like one doesn't come without the other. Having said that, I don't think it will come as a surprise the next thing that comes out of my mouth, and that was that Lucy was miserable doing this. She was quite unhappy for the first couple of weeks. I mean, the culture shock plus just like doing this mundane work day by day. The only thing that really kind of kept her alive was that Louise and her immediately 2 o'clock in the morning, they would just hit the clubs in the area. They would go partying all the way up until 7 a.m. But this is where in her diaries really like the worst thoughts come up for Lucy. There's lots of thoughts about her being dissatisfied with her body image, her comparing herself to Louise, and how Louise is doing so well and bringing so many more customers on because of how friendly and just how nice she is, and that she could never compare to her. How she is exhausted by just constantly feeling shit and so lonely despite being here with her friend. That she feels like she just wants to disappear, that she is reeling and doesn't know what to do, that she feels so outside and as if she has nothing anywhere. This phase where Lucie felt really low lasted for a couple of weeks. But then Louise was already dating a French guy named Combe. Something I haven't mentioned actually is if you were to find a boyfriend on the outside, of course you wouldn't be talking about them on Dochens. You wouldn't be talking about them to the customers, you know. That was kind of two separate worlds. But Combe, Louise's boyfriend, on one of the nights out, you know, after Casablanca, introduces Lucie to Scott. And Scott was this guy from Texas. And Lucie said, like, at first, you know, she felt like as if a sex god walked into the club himself. She immediately felt attracted to him, and she felt attracted to his accent as well. What mostly attracted Lucie to Scott was that for the first time ever, she actually thought she found somebody who leveled her. Like, Scott wasn't overly confident, and he confided in her that he actually usually felt like really average. And that resonated with Lucie. She finally felt like somebody can actually understand how she feels inside, and she wants to date somebody like that. Since meeting Scott, the weeks before Lucie would disappear were just flying by. And now I'm pulling you out from that happiness and joy and putting you back where we left it off, with Tim and Jane and her family coming to Japan because they're searching for Lucie because she was reported missing. Tim, Lucie's dad, and Sophie, her sister, were the first ones to fly into Japan. Tim and Sophie go to the Azabu police station to see where this investigation is going, what they have been doing for about a week. And they're kind of disappointed to find out that the police has only looked into this Chiba and this newly risen religion. And even in that research, they haven't really gone too far. Because Chiba apparently was a city of around 900,000 people, and this newly risen religion term actually referred to all New Age cults, and there were thousands of those to go through. So at this point, Tim and Sophie had a choice to make. Are they going to stick to the police that clearly doesn't really care? There is this stigma about knowing that Lucie now has worked as a hostess, so they didn't take it seriously from the get-go because it falls under the umbrella of sex work, unfortunately, or whether they wanted to stick with the media and make this story as public as possible. And they decide to choose the latter option and to go with the media. By choosing to go with the media, the hope was, yes, to publish Lucie's story anywhere in the world to get as much help as possible, but also in doing so to put pressure on the police to actually take this seriously, to put the stereotypes aside and actually investigate this story as they should have been doing since day one. Tim was really the driving force of this. He immediately started organizing press conferences. And during these press conferences, there is an expected way that the family members should act. And Tim and Sophie didn't really stick to that. When it comes to westernized press conferences, as we've seen, again, the family is expected to pour their soul out, showcase the missing person in the best light possible, give people the reason to fall in love with them, sort of try to identify with them and with the family who is missing a loved one, so that they want to be on your side, so that they technically want to do the work for you in order to find your missing loved one. Japanese culture matched that to a certain degree. You should still be teary-eyed, you should still be as emotional as possible. You're also supposed to plead to the captors to release your daughter and also apologize for causing inconvenience. Tim and Sophie didn't follow these rules. They organized this press conference and they answered all of the questions. For example, when they asked Tim about, well, would she have gone into a cult? Was this kind of the personality that she had? Tim said she was never religious at home to begin with, so it's kind of hard to understand how she would have gotten religious overnight and just decided, 2 months into the stay in Japan, to join a cult. When they asked Sophie about did she know that Lucie had a boyfriend here, Sophie said, "Of course I knew. I'm her sister." But Scott doesn't have anything to do with this. He has an airtight alibi, so we should really focus on the story at hand and not the boyfriend. So all of the responses were kind of cut and dry. There just wasn't much emotion to them. Tim really focused on the marketing. He really focused on the power of creating headlines in order to make Lucie's story as public as possible. What he's about to realize is that there is a political event right there where they are in Tokyo that can finally turn this story upside down. At the end of that July, the Japanese government was to host the summit meeting of the leaders of the 8 industrialized countries. So Putin was supposed to be there, Jacques Chirac, Bill Clinton, and also the British Prime Minister at the time, Tony Blair. So Tim goes to the British embassy and he's like, okay, new leaf, new strategy. We are organizing a press conference in order to get this story out in the UK. And the way we do it, the way we make the nation back home empathize with this story, is to play the gullible card, play the naive card, because a lot of us can place ourselves in a situation where we are in a foreign country. We don't know better. We don't know what we are doing. We are desperate. We are trying to pay off our debts. That is something that the whole nation can gather around. That is something that can reach Blair and get him to actually talk to the Prime Minister in Japan, and for the police finally to start actually empathizing with the victim here and investigating this. So he organizes a press conference, and during this press conference, Tim directly looked at the camera and asked for the captors to empathize with him as a father and to release his daughter to him. And then his voice faltered and he just kind of looked downwards and a tear popped up. And this was, as he later admitted to the writer of the book, staged, but it worked. The British media suddenly turned from describing her as the P word, the sex worker, the hostess, to an ex-British Airways stewardess, the air hostess, rather than the club hostess. And immediately the perceptions have switched. So during the summit, Tony Blair actually met with Sophie and with Tim. They spoke about it. They had a meeting and the Prime Minister agreed to meet with the Japanese Prime Minister. And from that point on, would you guess it? You never would have guessed it. But the police actually started prioritizing this case and they put their best men on it. Suddenly, 40 detectives were working on the case. 30,000 missing person posters were printed and distributed across the country. And the police finally, after weeks, started looking into the phone records. As I mentioned beginning of the story, Lucie made a phone call from the person's phone first, and then she made a phone call from another phone. So if they can trace like the cell towers, the phone numbers, where these phone calls have been placed from, they're closer to finding Lucie. But this of course takes insane amount of time. And in the meantime, a couple of things happen. A week after Tim moved to Japan, a guy named Hugh contacted him. He said he was really shaken by the story. He is a financial advisor from the UK, and without expecting anything, he can help him out. He actually on the spot kind of withdrew around £1,000 from the ATM for like any expenses that they might be having. Obviously, they had to buy plane tickets on the dot, plus organizing everything in Japan also costs money. And he also provided them with a space that they can use as an office for a tip line. He also told them, I'm a local at this restaurant and basically here you can eat for free. Like everything is going on my tab, so just use this space, use this restaurant to like feed your whole family while you're here in Japan looking for your daughter. This tip line didn't yield too many results. They were, of course, the weirdos that would call in and be like, yeah, I've seen her like 5 seconds ago. And then Tim and Sophie would be running to the spot where supposedly Lucy has been spotted. And then they would realize, oh, it's actually Tim's new wife, who was also like about 20 plus years older than Lucy and only had blonde hair. And they were like, okay, this is gonna go well. Then there were weirdos who asked to go on a date with Sophie because that was clearly her priority. But there were two tips that Tim thought would lead somewhere. In the end, they ended up being dead ends, but I'm just going to mention them briefly. One of them came from somebody who identified themselves as Mr. O. And this guy said he was a porn producer, in particular involved into the world of S&M, and another guy that he knew actually ended up hanging himself. And when he was found, the guy that hung himself was found in a dungeon with posters of Lucie Blackman all over, taped all over his walls. So Tim and the police kind of go there, break into this dungeon, look around, try to figure out, did this man even know Lucy? Was he involved? Was this like S&M gone wrong? They investigate into every single person in the store, into the porn producers, into this person that hung themselves, but they just find no connection. The second person Tim got a phone call from was a guy named Mike Hills. Mike said that he was also a Londoner but lived in Netherlands at the time. He explained to Tim that he had contacts in Japan, some of them though in the underworld, belonging to the Japanese mafia, the Yakuza. He would tell Tim that he was involved in gun sales and that due to that he had some middlemen in Tokyo. Mike would tell Tim that one of his arms dealer friends could get Lucy back. He was always alluding to sex trafficking and that these people knew where Lucy was held, but of course it would cost money. The whole operation in total would cost around £50,000, and of course Tim had to pay around 12,000 up front. Mike would go disappearing on Tim a couple of times during these transactions, but he would always call him back and would always keep him hanging. So at first, Tim sort of made a room available in British Embassy, had an ambulance on the ready because he thought on this day that Mike will be returning Lucy and that Lucy will be released. A week passes after that and Mike calls him back. He says, the kidnappers have fallen through with this plan. They actually couldn't arrange it then and there. But his arms dealer can arrange for Lucy to be intercepted on this vessel, on this ship, on the dock, and then Lucy can jump off on like his ship, and again that would cost XYZ amount of money. And this is where Tim kind of started doubting it. By that point, he didn't really know who to trust. He was jet lagged, he was doing everything in order to find his daughter, and also he didn't really know, how the underworld works in Japan, so he was just desperate. Plus, Mike did send him his passport, so like copy of the passport, and the water bill as the proof of address, and then also like a reference details from this guy, apparently his ex-friend who was also in the underworld. But it was at the point when Mike got another intermediary to also communicate with Tim, and when he started telling him that he is actually now in Hong Kong but that he's still working on this story, that Tim really started doubting this. So instead of calling Mike, he rang his residence in Holland. And here he asked to speak with Mike Hill, and they said like, oh yeah, he's just like down the shop, like he will be back in a moment, do you want to stay on the line? And Tim was like, no, I don't want to stay on the line and wait for the exploitative son of a bitch. So what he did instead, he got recording devices and recorded every single conversation that he had with Mike. And later Tim would be contacted by another British family whose child went missing in Colombia. And this family was also contacted by Mike Hill, who was just exploiting them for money without ever returning the child back. Mike did end up going to court in the end, and he only got about 3.5 years for technically being a fraud. So I guess that's something. But what Tim says about this particular tip that came into the tip line and all of this experience, which again lasted for weeks, is that he is, in a way, as weird as that sounds, grateful for it, because it really kept his head above water. It made him keep fighting, believing that Lucie might still be out there, that she still might be alive. After weeks of being scammed by Mike Hill, Tim returns to the police station. He's like, "Hey lads, any progress on this investigation?" And they say, actually, not so much on like what we focused on to begin with, the phone calls and locating those, but your daughter Lucie has actually been writing to you. Well, rather to Louise, who we have been questioning for the past couple of weeks. And Tim is there like, "Say what? My daughter has been writing and you haven't looped me into this, right? Like, what the fuck is going on? Show me the letters right now." What happened as Tim was getting scammed was that the police only focused on one person, and that was Louise. Louise had to appear at the police station sort of day and night. She had to be there, and they treated her nicely. You know, they would be spending money on her breakfast, lunch, making sure that she is fed, but they would just continuously ask her the same questions. They would ask Louise about the most banal questions, like Lucie's health, her birthmark, what kind of health issues did she have when she was younger. They asked Louise about her French boyfriend, her other friends, people they lived with, customers in the club. What did you do? Like, you were the last person to see her. Tell us about your friendship. Were the two of you partying during the night? Okay, how come that you were partying up until 7 in the morning? Were the two of you using drugs? And by constantly repeating the same question, they did get a bit more information. Again, it didn't lead anywhere, but it led the police to the knowledge that Lucie would sometimes take drugs. Lucie said that they have taken some weed when, it was shared in the shit house. And also during clubbing, Louise took ecstasy twice, but Lucie only took it once. So they sort of did plan to supply themselves with some drugs to keep them up at night, but it wasn't a habit, it wasn't an addiction. And also, Lucie was smart enough not to have consumed drugs with a customer, because again, the whole point was to get them coming back, not to be unconscious and not know what the hell you're talking about. So if she was ever to be given drugs by a customer somewhere by the seaside, it would have had to be a spiked drink. And when it came to the letters that the police has received, they were all directed to Louise. And Louise, just looking at them from everything, from signature, tone of voice, said, "This isn't Lucie. In fact, it sounds like possibly a local trying to make sure that, his English seems perfect and for somebody to buy into this story to prolong the investigation." And she mostly said the content of the letters was what solidified it for her. Because in the content, she would be like, "Louise, you don't even know me. Why would you doubt that I would join a cult?" And it just wasn't like how she spoke with Louise. And also, when Lucie would write to Louise, she would refer to her as Lou. So she just immediately was like, "No, this isn't her. It's somebody trying to present themselves as her." Some of the letters also contained money. So they contained between 6,000 and 7,000 pounds in order to pay off her debts. So as if Lucie has joined a cult, which famously take your money, not give you the money to pay off your debts, but sure. So she joined the most generous cult and then was sending the money to pay off her debts. Seems legit. The most illegit thing, is not a word, was when Tim got a hang of one of those letters and he realized the date on one of them was his birthday, and he just knew Lucy never forgot any of her family's birthday. If this was Lucy, she would have wished him a happy birthday, so that just sort of solidified it for him. And then, when he spoke to the police and realized, well, there's not really a move on this investigation, is it? And I have just wasted my whole time speaking with Mike Hills, speaking with some S&M guy. So I gotta take the matters into my own hands. And this is when Tim started clubbing. Yeah. Tim would go to Casablanca, he would go to these clubs in the area and started speaking with hostesses. He was mostly interested in Casablanca about drugs. Again, was Lucy using them? Was she into them? Was anybody offering them? Sort of like the code words for them. But then what he didn't really expect is the stories that he would hear. Because after him and the police here, really, because they were kind of under pressure as well, were all hearing similar kind of stories from these hostesses. When they would arrange to meet up with this man, he would suggest a drive to the seaside. In the car, the AC would be on. It doesn't matter what the weather was like outside, and this guy would always be profusely sweating. All of these women describe the same sweaty ass man driving them to the seaside. Here at the seaside, he would maybe take like some pictures of them by the beach, make them feel comfortable, and then invite them for a drink to his flat. Again, these hostesses wouldn't refuse, and the last thing they would remember is taking a sip out of this drink. Different women would find themselves in different situations once they were to wake up in the flat. Some of them would be naked, some of them would be completely dressed. A lot of hostesses were street smart just because of the nature of the job. So, in a lot of these instances, they wouldn't even ask anything. They were just like, okay, fight or flight mode on. If they were to ask a single question, it would be, when are you taking me back to town? Like, I need to appear in a bar. They would never ask, like, what happened here? What have you done to me? Anything like that. There was only one of these women who actually reported this to the police 5 years before Lucy went missing in 1997. Katie Vickers remembers the exact same thing. Sweaty man, car, seaside, sort of like palm trees, looked like might be holiday apartments. And then she took a sip of gin and tonic in her situation and blacked out. Once she woke up, a guy called a cab, and as she was entering, sort of stumbling because she was still really hazy, into this cab, he just stuffed a lot of money into her purse, thinking this is going to shut her up so she won't report it to the police. But as she returned to the club, she spoke to the manager and he said, go report it. But when she did, the police just didn't take it seriously. They sort of like wrote it on like a scrap of paper, wasn't even, a notebook, wasn't even taking detailed notes. They were like, yeah, we'll look into it. And then they never did. They told Katie they couldn't investigate her incident because of the lack of evidence, but she said she was able to give them the accurate description of a man, clearly describe the location at the time, and also gave them the mobile phone that was written by the man himself, who to Katie introduced himself as Koji. Hostesses from Roppongi, whether active or retired, have gone through the same experience. Clara Mendes from Canada, Isabel Valdez and Charmaine from Australia, Ronya from Israel, Katie from America, Lana from Britain, Tanya from Ukraine. Each of them recalled a different name: Yuji, Koji, Saito, Akra. The experience would be the same. They would sometimes wake up in different circumstances. So some of them would be naked, some of them would be dressed. One of them actually snatched a camera from her kidnapper and just ran out. So he hunted her down and paid her up to stay silent. And if it wasn't for the rapist giving them money, if it wasn't for the shame, for the fact that they knew they won't be believed because they will be seen as sex workers, it was because they were in similar situation. It was for the same reason that Louise didn't go to the police straight away, because she knew that it would be illegal for the immigrants on a tourist visa to work in Japan, so that they could be the ones to get in trouble. Once Lucy disappeared, another woman came forward to the police. This woman described that as she was hostessing one night, which is something that she has been doing for a couple of months in Japan, that a guy walked in and introduced himself as Yuji Honda. She immediately thought that he was kind of memorable. He had a lisp as he was talking and kind of seemed like he had a funny shape of a mouth. She described it as almost a baby's mouth, and he kind of had the arrogant way of walking. But mostly what made her remember him was that he was profusely sweating. Even in the air-conditioned club, he would sometimes take out a hand towel to mop his face, neck, and eyebrow. Man, if eyebrows don't keep your sweat just as you're sitting, there's a problem. Just imagine the club. You have to go to a club and like produce a towel to like wipe yourself off. Nah, this is next level. From this woman's perspective, he was a perfect customer. He would keep coming back, always request for her on the door. He would stay for hours and hours on end, keep ordering the most expensive alcohol, and also take her out on dates. So she was getting paid technically by only being with this one person and by going on dates. So one night after the club closes around 3 a.m., this customer suggests to this woman to drive towards the seaside because he has an apartment there on the beach. And this hostess knew that she would have been up for a couple of hours anyways going clubbing, so she thought I might as well go on a date, get some extra money, and then, I'll go clubbing another night. So she accepts. In the car, the same story repeats. Like, this woman was shaking because of how cold it was, while the guy was sweating through his shirt, which is like next level of pathetic, but we move on. And this woman immediately said that she was quite disappointed as soon as they made it to this seaside area, because she expected maybe, a nice house, pool, garden, something, but they just went up this disgusting looking block of flats. She described the apartment that was on the third floor of one of the blocks, sort of looking like a shabby bachelor pad, with a single living room that was facing the really small balcony, narrow kitchen inside, and some partitioned off area that was apparently a bedroom. Decoration wise, she says the place looked kitsch, as if it was decorated by a grandmother or a mother. It was all like floral, cabbage like roses and weird ass patterns on the couch. They sat down at this table and started drinking beer and just chatting, and then he produced a guitar and started singing and playing Samba Pati by Santana. There are a couple of things in this story that are unforgivable, and the fact that the sweaty ass bastard over here is destroying Santana, for me, that is definitely one of them. So many, after all of the rapes and murder and all that, but definitely up there. First of all, stop sweating. Second of all, stop ruining good artists. Why do you have good taste in music, you sweaty ass shit? This hostess as well found this to be really naff and just not manly, but at this point it was already light outside, so she suggested like she's gonna get going and go home, thinking she will see this guy in the club next time. But this guy wasn't about to give in so easily. He says he has this rare wine that he actually wants to share with this woman, and he just decided this would be a perfect opportunity. As soon as she takes a sip of this rare wine, she blacks out. And the next day that this woman wakes up, she remembers waking up completely clothed, and she doesn't remember being sore or being in pain. She just remembers feeling really hungover. And she's thinking, if I was to even say something, You know, how am I gonna get back to Tokyo? Like, I have no idea where I'm at. So she doesn't say anything, he drives her back, and she doesn't hear from him again. She moves on with her life, and a few months later, she gets a call from her friend that used to hostess with her. The friend's name was Emma Phillips, and this friend told her that her sister Louise and her best friend Lucie Blackman are coming to Tokyo, to Japan, and if she could only help them out, maybe meet them at a place that they will name a shit house. Give them a list of the clubs that they can go to in order to find a job as hostesses. Because this woman was Krista. And this is the moment where, if you are screaming at the screen, at the girl in the box here, I need you to stop and think about it rationally, because I've done the same thing. I was like, if only Krista has shared one of the most painful memories of her life with the two strangers. And then I heard my own thoughts and I was like, of course, she wouldn't have shared this story with Lucy and Louise, so there was no way of them knowing that this has happened to her, nor did Krista know that this was happening to other girls at the time. She only knew that she has to come forward now that Lucy has disappeared. By this point, Blackmans were sort of alternating. So, at some point, Jane would be in Japan giving press conferences, speaking to the media and the police. Then she would return, and the same with Tim and Sophie. Rupert, Lucy's younger brother, actually remembers how awful this period was. He was 16, and by September he had to return to the new term at school, and Lucy was everything that people spoke about here in the UK. People would be speculating, was she even in Japan anymore? Was she on a boat? Was she in a cult? And he said that is the worst thing about it all, not knowing what emotion to feel. Whether you should be mourning, whether you should be strong, or whether you're just meant to be anything. Jane was a lot better at doing press conferences than Tim, and with Jane I think it was genuine emotion trying to relate this story to other parents and other mothers in Japan. She would say, "Tomorrow it will be 3 months since Lucy went missing. I'm here to appeal to the women of Japan, the mothers, the daughters, the sisters, the aunts, and the grandmothers. Anyone who can give us or the police those vital clues which can help us solve this dreadful mystery. To whoever is holding her, please, I beg you, from the bottom of my heart, please let her go now. If it is a man on his own, you've had her long enough. I can't believe the Japanese people can't help. We know you care. We know how family-oriented you are. As the mother of a daughter who is like a sister to me, it is the worst nightmare and it never goes away. I don't sleep. My life is just on hold. I don't function correctly. I feel as if my heart has been ripped out. It breaks my heart. My most loving daughter, so full of life that she lights up a room." Most of the family at this point feared that a decade from now, 2 decades from now, they will still be not knowing what has happened to their daughter. Because of course this dies down in the media. They move on to other stories. If there are no clues, no leads, you can't really even keep this story alive. So the family was doing the best they can, just making sure these press conferences go on, making sure they're still investing into printing missing posters out, into making Lucy's memory alive. Chop chop, bitch, where was the police investigation at this point? Okay, the girl in the back is getting eggy again. Okay, I think it's time. I think it's time to tell you where the police investigation was here, really, because with the added pressure of everybody, including mostly politicians to be fair, or consuls from the British Embassy, the police finally started getting the warrants for those phone records. This was hard for many reasons that I'm not gonna go into. Basically, the police said that, well, at first they had to have all of the investigation and had to have like a suspect in order to get the warrant, which is bullshit. But another thing that made it really hard to get that warrant is that at the time these different burner phones were purchased, you didn't have to present the ID to buy them. So this has literally changed like a week or two after Lucie disappeared. But it kind of made it difficult for people to actually connect these to the same person. Anyways, the police here was shite, that was what I'm getting at. But now they had a warrant. So they wanted to identify the origin of the calls that were made to that payphone in the shithouse. And also to identify the owner of the numbers that Koji and Yuji had given to Katie Vickers and to Krista. The best that they had at the time was the relay station, sort of like the cell tower, and that led them to the town of Zushi. So the police, one by one, takes Katie Vickers to the Zushi Marina complex. They take Krista, they take Clara Mendez, they take Isabel, and all of them recognize this as the place where they were drugged and undressed. They remember the marina, they remember the apartment complex, but this apartment complex had like so many apartments in them. They had no idea where they walked, like which entrance, which exit. So here the police had to really do some work for a change. And here is where the police looked for the criminal records of people living in these buildings. There was only one name that popped up. And this name popped up for a guy who was a peeping Tom in like women's public lavatories. And they decide, okay, let's put his mugshot for this offense because this actually classified him as a sex offender. That's why he popped up on the system. Let's put this mugshot picture in like a photo array. Let's show them to all of these women. And all of them pick that same guy from that photo lineup. And all of them say, like, this is a really weird picture, police included. It seemed like he was trying the best he can not to look at the camera and to, like, hide his face as much as that is possible when people are taking a mugshot of you. This man seems to be owning multiple cars and multiple locations, like different car parks and different apartments that he has in his name, so the police knew that this was going to be harder than they thought. So what they do is they manage to track one of his cars, get the license plates, and then put 10 men to just follow this car around, to just trail his movements, because they had to figure out where he's going, what he's doing, if he still has Lucie, if he is connecting to this Chiba place, if there is a cult to begin with, and most importantly, if Lucie is still with him, if she's still alive. While they're tailing him, they're also doing the admin work where they're trying to track down all of the properties. And they find that this man has another property about 20 miles from Zushi at Miura Peninsula. And here, they ring up the police and they give them the name. They say, do you know anything? Did you ever have any complaints? And they say, yeah, we actually have a weird report on file. So what happened is that we received a noise complaint from a neighbor in this block of flats. The police was called, we went, we knocked on the door, and the scene we have encountered was quite strange. Not criminal, but strange. The half-naked man, sweating from every pore of his body, opened the door and he seemed like he was doing some strenuous, vigorous work. And the only thing we could see from the door was just like a slab of concrete inside of the flat. When the inspectors asked to see what is going on, why is half of the room covered, what is the concrete about, he said, showing you my room would be like showing you my whole naked body, and basically said if they don't have a warrant, that they shouldn't come back. But then, once the officers leave, he actually, himself, the man, rang them back, and he uncovered, good, what was under the wraps. And it was the head of a dog. The man has apologized and said that he just didn't want the inspectors to think that he was doing something weird. You see, his dog has died a couple of days ago and he just wanted to provide him with a burial. The officers later said that it didn't look like the dog just died a couple of days ago, like the body of the dog, or well, the head they have seen had looked quite stiff. Plus, it also looked like whether or not he was trying to pour concrete over it. They just had like all strange vibes. But now, what he has done here, this man in question, was that, well, they thought that there was no need for a warrant, that there is nothing suspicious happening here. As they find that bit of information, the people that are tailing him ring the police station and they tell the superintendent named Udo, I think we need to go in with an arrest because we have just seen him in this harbor and he has just bought a boat. Not just that, but to the manager of this boat shop, he looked like he didn't know what he was talking about, that he was not experienced in this area at all, and that he was very particular that he needs a boat with an anchor and with a long rope. To be precise, about 1,000 meters of rope. That afternoon, the police goes to the public prosecutor's office to get a warrant. Obviously, they didn't have enough here for Lucie's disappearance, but what they had was plentiful of other rape cases that they have never taken seriously. So they get a warrant on the basis of arresting him for the rape of one of the other hostesses. The police knew they had to act before the morning news because they feared that if he heard the news, he would escape, but they also feared that this story would end in suicide if he does. At 6 a.m. the next morning in October 2000, the police was taking out the apartment and they saw a man go out to buy the newspapers. They descended on him and arrested him for the suspected rape and abduction of Clara Mendez in 1996. The papers that day will name a man, a 48-year-old businessman who, when the police arrested him, was trembling and a bead of sweat was visible on his forehead. And that is where I'm leaving the part 1. Part 2 will be out in the next couple of days, so don't go out there googling, okay? No cheating. Stay with me for this one because that one is a doozy in itself. In the meantime, I'm really interested in knowing your theories in the comments. I mean, it kind of seems so far that it might be the same man that is responsible for all of them, but what do we think about his childhood, his love life? Who do we think this man is? Because that's all coming in part 2. And what do we think is going to happen, like in the aftermath, without googling? No cheating, no cheating. What do you think? Just follow the predictions and then you listen to part 2 and you're like, damn, I was right. I didn't have that satisfactory thing when I listened to Stephanie Sue tell this story. No, because this story has plenty of more twists coming. So you keep predicting, maybe you are better at this than me. And I shall be seeing you in the next couple of days. I think Monday. I think Monday is the day. Monday looks like the day. Put it in your calendars. Actually, you don't have to go to that extent. There's a notification bell, there is a subscribe button, there is a like button, mostly for the purposes of what I just said in that sentence before. Notification bell, but you get my drift. Yeah, subscribe, like, all that good stuff. And I'm out because it's been about 6 hours, so bye guys. Not complaining, never complaining. It's been a fascinating story. It is one of the most interesting ones out there. So I'm not complaining. I'm just saying, appreciate me, please. Jesus Christ. Digging a hole. Digging a hole. Deep hole. I thought of a dead joke. First of all, lower your expectations. Lower them right now. What kind of nuts are emotionally unavailable? Walnuts! You get it? Because they have walls, they have barriers in between you and them. Are you okay? Are you doing alright? No. No, the honest answer is This was middle of the sentence, by the way. I just talking mid-sentence is like, whoa. I need a copyright expert. You know, when I actually showcase the videos, the lo-fi stuff in the background, will that, because it's kind of like a video within a video, will that be copyrighted once I'm monetized? Which will be soon, again, because you will like and subscribe to this video, right? Yeah, okay. They're subscribing to the channel, not to the video. Learn the terminology, learn the fucking lingo. Basically, the question is, copyright experts, how do I sort that out? Because I have been thinking, after, of course, like doing 20 videos with like that kind of background, I was like, hey, girl in the back trying to sabotage me the whole last day. I was like, bitch, you should be thinking about what's showing on that screen. So yeah, somebody let me know in the comments, because I don't know how to pro edit that out of those videos without like removing them and reposting it. I should be thinking about these things before I do them, before I like do all the hard work, all the research. But no, Maja doesn't do it that way, does she? I'm just talking about herself in the third person. Yeah, this is really close, bitch. Why hear you before going on holiday? You have been playing with the sound, and now that thing sounded way too quiet. Maja, god damn it, you have been doing this for so long, and you still can't nail it. Okay, come, listen, girl in the back will not win today. I am telling you right now, the girl in the back, quit it, cut it, will not fucking win on it. Not taking the hoops off, which hoops? Why the bit? I don't know who needs to hear this, but if you are a tomboy or I'm giving advice to lesbians, I don't know who needs to hear this. Oh, this is actually quite nice with my shoulder. I'm a couple of teeth. Jesus Christ. Okay. You're good. You're good. I'm a couple of teeth lighter, 2 teeth lighter to be exact. You should still see a couple of them in the front. A few pounds heavier and ready to go. That is not gonna be this intro. That is not it. That ain't it. That cannot be it. Change it up. No, don't explain that this. No, don't explain anything. Don't explain. No context whatsoever for the people. No, watch a previous video. It's all a story. You're gonna start from day one to understand everything that is happening. Okay, that is how you get people to subscribe. Going strong, going strong. You're about to say a disclaimer, bitch. Sexual true crime cases. What is wrong with me? Well, now that is out of the way, that is a question for another time. Let's dive into the story. Wow, that was a reflection moment. Like, truly, what is wrong with me? Are you okay? Literally, you only cover like pornography. The next couple of cases are also going to be like, what, fetishes? And the one is kidnapping. It doesn't have sex. No, spoil it. No, but truly, you covered like a porn hub and chill on a porn, like the slavery. What's wrong with you? There is nothing. It's just like morbid. It's nobody talks about them. That's why I have to. She says nervously. She says questioning her whole self and personality. Alright. It's not on, bitch. It's not on. Let me remove this book. I have definitely read it. I recommend it. But now it's gonna do this thing with a light. So it has to go. Cool. Nobody really cared about that. Nobody cared about watching you scratch your nose, get paid, kicked in. At the time that they got married, Tim was working at this shoe shop. Who was that? You wanted to say Mozart, Maya, please. This is like a child who said, tick tack tock. You okay? We lost it completely. No, Guten Abend. No, it's not Guten Abend, Maya. Schlafen, the German lullaby. Everybody will understand. If I clock it, by the end of this, I will put it. Feel it, Jakob, Gute Jakob. Schlaf, Jakob, schlaf, good. God. This is such an embarrassment. I should be fluent in German. I can't make up a sentence. Ding dong dong. Yeah, sick. Round of applause. Sick. Where the fuck was I in the sentence? guys, I remembered on my own. Literally nobody cares. It's Bruder Jakob, schläfst du noch, I like ding okay, you don't remember all of it. That was so unimpressive. That was so undermining. Wow. Thanks for bearing with me for the German corner of this outtake. Is this a condition? I cannot describe to you how disgusting this part of the case is to me. Like, why can he not stop sweating? This must be a condition. Also, as we learn in part 2, he's quite rich, so, like, can you not operate on your sweat glands? Can you not, like, take them out or some shit? Like, you know, take them out, make them, like, sweat less, and then put them back in. Something has to fix. Just imagine the grossness of it all. Just the grossness of the story. He keeps sweating with the AC on. Like, would he sweat in the UK? Just like going in t-shirt and shorts. What is this all about? Is this a condition? Tell me right now, because I'm so grossed out by this part of the whole case. And I never stopped. He was just thinking to himself, just get off the stairs, just run back in, just go home, you know, like, you won't get a refund. It's your priority. It's like, you won't get a refund for the flight, just get off here right now though. Fuck it, fuck the money, it will just accumulate to your debt. Fuck it, just never go. Trust your gut feeling, people, trust your gut. Okay.